You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Welcome to this episode of the Business of Practice podcast, where we focus on the business and human sides of equine veterinary medicine. In this episode, we're going to talk with Dr. Emma Reed, 2022 AAEP President and Associate Dean for Professional Programs at The Ohio State University's College of Veterinary Medicine. We'll talk with her about the development of competency-based veterinary education and the feedback methods that accompany it. I'm your host, Dr. Amy Grice, business consultant and former equine practice owner. The Business of Practice podcast is brought to you in 2024 by CareCredit. Dr. Emma Reed is a veterinary graduate of the Western College of Veterinary Medicine in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, who completed a large animal surgery residency at the University of Georgia's College of Veterinary Medicine in Athens in 2003. She became a diplomat of the American College of Veterinary Surgeons in 2004. After working at the Ontario Veterinary College in Guelph, Ontario as a staff surgeon teaching large animal surgery for a few years, she then joined a private surgical referral practice just outside Calgary, working with international sport horses. In 2007, Dr. Reed was hired at the University of Calgary's newly established Faculty of Veterinary Medicine. She served as a faculty member and the chair of the Clinical Skills Program from 2008 until 2015, and then in 2015 was appointed to serve as the Associate Dean Academic. In 2018, she became the Associate Dean for Professional Programs at the Ohio State University's College of Veterinary Medicine, where she oversees students and the curriculum, including currently leading a major curricular redesign at the college. Dr. Reed is a founding member of the Competency-Based Veterinary Education Task Force, which implemented national standards for outcomes-based veterinary education. Welcome, Dr. Reed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here. I have to say, Amy, when I heard you read the introduction, I just have to make one minor correction.
Okay.
Which is a hard word to say, but it's Saskatchewan. I couldn't even say how you originally said it in the introduction, but it's Saskatchewan. It's one of the provinces in Canada. Hard word to say.
Yeah. Well, I knew it was one of the provinces, but hard to say.
Hard to say.
Thank you for pronouncing it.
Thank you.
Thank you for pronouncing it correctly. For all those who live there, I'm sure that they will appreciate that.
Yeah.
You've been involved in veterinary education and changing it to create a more positive and productive learning environment for, years and years, over a decade. What did that process look like, and what led you down that path?
That's a great question. I think what led me down the path of education started a very long time ago when I was applying to get into vet school. My backup plan was to be an educator, to be a teacher. And so I always kind of thought that if things didn't work out, that's what I would do. And now I feel really fortunate because I get to do both, essentially. I'm an educator and a veterinarian, which I think is just fantastic career. So I'm very lucky that worked out. As far as the changing face of education, I would say students that we have today are different, very different from ourselves. Some of us remember what vet school was like and how we were taught and how things happen nowadays. And the students that are going through the programs at the moment are different than we used to be. And the requirements are different. the requirements that are set out by our accrediting bodies, so the American Vet Med Association Council on Education. There are different standards now than there used to be, and there are also different resources that kind of impact that as well. So when I was an associate dean at Calgary, I attended a meeting in Minnesota of a whole bunch of the associate deans in 2015. And at that meeting, we were trying to respond to an introduction of an outcomes-based accreditation standard, so Standard 11. And it required us to demonstrate learning of our students in show the evidence that students are learning, and it sort of laid out a number of things. And we thought, okay, there are some things in here that we don't currently assess, or that we don't have ways of being sure that the students are learning. And so we got together as a group and said, we're going to set out and make these sort of common tools, if you will, to show that students are learning these things. And as we started to talk more and more, we realized that we weren't even on the same page as to what it was we were actually trying to make. Like, we couldn't all agree on what the outcomes would be at the end of the program and exactly what a student would have to know and be able to do to be a veterinarian. And so that led to a working group of 10 of us in veterinary education who set out to create a framework of competencies, or framework of outcomes, that was common to all of the accredited veterinary schools, where we could say, this is what a student has to be able to know and be able to do by the time they graduate. And the journey of making that framework took place over the next 3 or 4 years and resulted in a 3-part educational model that was published through the American Association of Vet Med Colleges. And that framework has become the sort of the guiding model for modern veterinary school curricula, which is kind of exciting. And so really that I got pulled into this sort of a little bit at a time. But now that competency-based framework has become the backbone of the curriculum redesign that we are doing here at Ohio State. And a number of schools across the country are redesigning their curricula and building it on that same kind of foundation.
The Business of Practice podcast is brought to you by CareCredit. CareCredit keeps equine veterinarians at the heart of care by providing horse owners with simple, budget-friendly financing options. By helping to bridge the gap between cost and care, CareCredit supports healthy financial relationships between veterinarians and their clients. Clients have a flexible way to pay over time for all types of care, and practices get paid in 2 business days. It's a payment experience everyone can feel good about.
Are schools other than veterinary schools moving to more competency-based evaluations?
Yeah, great question. So yes, the health professions broadly are moving towards a more competency-based model. Some professions have sort of mandated that. So nursing would be an example where they've more mandated that schools take on that approach. Some professions, more like veterinary medicine, it's a voluntary effort that built it, and it's a voluntary system for adopting it at this point. But more and more, I think what we have been doing is sort of being incorporated into the accreditation standards. And no doubt the model that was built will be very useful, I think, for helping the 13 new veterinary schools that are coming online create and develop their curricula.
I wonder how that will go when so many of them are using sort of off-campus clinical practices and, the private practice, how they will incorporate that kind of framework in the evaluations they're getting of students in a clinical setting that are in private practices, because it's like our education was so different. I mean, I remember being in a colic surgery with Dean Richardson at 2 a.m. and being asked like the name of very small arteries and being clueless and terrified. So what do you think will happen with those the schools that have that different model?
Well, I think that's the idea behind having this kind of framework of competencies, is it's sort of built at that 30,000 foot level. And it basically outlines that there's several domains of function. So it outlines things like communications, collaboration, professionalism, clinical skills, clinical reasoning, and knowledge. So it outlines sort of big buckets of things that students have to be able to know and to do. And it doesn't matter whether you're in a distributed model like the one that I worked in for a while in Calgary, or whether you're in a more traditional type on-campus based, big teaching hospital on-campus model. At the end of the day, we're still producing veterinarians. We're still producing individuals that are going out into the same kinds of workplaces. And so the skill set broadly is the same for those environments. So I think that's what's great about the model, is that there was 10 of us in that original working group. And eventually we had to come to consensus, and across all of our 10 different programs, what are the things that we all agree on? And then once we all agreed, then we took it to the 30 some odd associate deans across the country and said, across 30 some odd schools, what do we all agree on? And so on and so on. And so through that process, we gained buy-in and insight into what does every college that is producing veterinarians essentially have to agree is the fundamental things that a veterinarian needs to be.
That's so helpful, I'm sure, for every single educator to think about it in a different way. And go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think sometimes helpful to practitioners too, because when they say, what is it you're teaching students to do? You can show them that kind of framework and say, broadly, these are all the things, these are all the components that go into what we're doing to educate the students. And what you want them to be at the end of the program obviously drives how the program is structured. Because you have to put all those, if you want them to be something at the end, you have to teach them that along the way, which seems very obvious. But in the past, it actually wasn't.
Right. Especially when you think about, if you think about the quadrants of psychological safety and, motivation, if you have a really highly motivated person, which most veterinary students are, and there's no psychological safety, you get anxiety and, some mental health issues. If you have psychological safety and motivation, you're in the learning zone. And so how, I'm thinking about this competency-based education model, which, the 30,000 foot view, but how do you actually put it into action?
Yeah, great question. So that model, that 30,000 foot overarching kind of model, can be broken into 3 parts. So the the first part is the actual competencies. So as I said, those are bucketed into these domains or big buckets of things that we want students to be able to do, or new graduates. So there's 32 different things across these bucketed areas that students need to be able to do. And then in addition to that, there's a second part called milestones. And what milestones are is describing for each one of those things you want them to be able to do, for each one of those competencies, what are the basic steps, big sort of developmental steps along the journey for a student to be able to get there. So, for example, in a veterinary program, we talk about students advancing from a novice learner, knows nothing basically, to an advanced beginner, and then to competent, and then eventually to proficient. So when someone is out in practice, they're working at that very proficient level. And a lot of things they do become very automated. And then the last part is that we develop what's called entrustable professional activities, which is a horrible word, horrible term, but it sort of came from medicine. So, but those are nicknamed for short EPAs. And what EPAs are is just a series of tasks or activities, in our case, that a veterinarian does every single day. So performing a surgical procedure from preparation at the beginning all the way through to, discharge of the patient. Something like performing anesthesia from preparation to recovery. Performing a complete physical exam, gathering a history, and entering it all into the medical records. So things that a graduate would do every single day of practice. And those EPAs then become an opportunity for us to watch them doing those things in action in the actual workplace. So in the case of training students, that's in that hospital or clinic environment in the fourth year. And then we can give them feedback on how they're doing and look for areas where they're struggling and need some help to get better. And that is probably the biggest emphasis in a competency-based system, is the emphasis on feedback and the emphasis on watching performance and making observations and giving them meaningful, what went well, and here's what you can do even better the next time you try and do this. I think for a lot of us that went through a long time ago, before the competency-based system, you worked on the premise that if you didn't get any feedback, you were doing okay. If nobody pulled you aside and said, hey, wait a minute, you were sort of probably doing fine, but you never got any real feedback, often, positive or negative. You just sort of plugged along and eventually learned through the school of hard knocks. Learners today are raised in the K-12 environment in a very competency-based type system where they get a lot of feedback and they're used to that. So it's no different when they come to vet school. They want to know the things they're doing well and the things that they're not doing well. And the things they're not doing well, they expect help to improve. And they want feedback specifically on how. And so we're trying to encourage that shift or change, not only in the veterinary college training, but also out in the workplace, is the continuation of that sort of supportive teaching type environment, helping mentor new graduates into practice.
That is that's probably a tough part of this, because I think both getting the word out that this is how, just knowing that from the time they're developing as lifetime learners in kindergarten through high school, that they're getting this kind of feedback and it's a competency-based learning. And then going out in the real world of veterinary medicine, where we've always done it this way or that way, and having a different kind of feedback, perhaps if they're not doing it the way the practice has always done it, kind of getting a cold shoulder instead of getting feedback, or being told in no sort of by getting the cold shoulder that they don't belong. So how can veterinarians, it's a two-part question. How do we get this information out to veterinarians that are already out there and mentoring people? And then secondly, what advice do you have for veterinarians who are mentoring students or early career colleagues, because they may not be doing it in the most effective way? I know many of them say, just watch me do it. This is how you need to do it. And don't question why I did it that way. It must be so hard to be an early career veterinarian right now, because it's so different than how it used to be.
Yeah, very, very good observations. So first, about getting the information out, I think one of the things is it's important for practitioners who are out there to be educated about the fact that the world has changed, and that there is information out there and available now about education that did not used to exist when we went through. And just like there are competencies or outcomes that we expect of a new graduate, there are competencies and outcomes that are expected of those who are doing the mentoring, of those who are doing the educating. If you are offering an internship, that isn't just a way to have cheap labor or a cheaper workforce, right? That is an educational opportunity. A student or graduate is giving up making a higher salary in a different setting by virtue of the fact that they're coming to you to be educated, to be trained. So if you're taking on that training responsibility, you have a responsibility to have some skills as an educator. And I think for some of us, that's a very different way of thinking. Like, I actually have some responsibilities in this, besides, as you said, just going about my daily work and someone just watches what I do. This generation expects and wants feedback as part of that education, and they want to be mentored. They want to overtly understand what it is that they're trying to learn and be able to do. So as far as advice to a mentor, I would say recognize that there are things that you need to know and learn, and you need to improve your own skills. So we need to look for opportunities and ways to be able to do that. Getting the information out there, I think some things like AAEP has definitely been trying to do that. So with the Sustainability Commission for equine practice, the internship subcommittee did a great job looking around, scanning the environment, and said, there's this real emphasis on competency-based education in veterinary school. We should think about continuing that into the intern program. And then they used some of that CBBE, or competency-based vet education model, to develop some tools for practices. And those are available on the AAEP website under the Sustainability Commission. If you go there, there's sort of 5 parts to the Sustainability Commission. And there's one on internships. If you click on that, you can find a bunch of resources. It gives you the competencies that we expect interns to be able to do. It gives you a list of skills. It gives you some EPAs that we want the students to do and be able to assess. So those things are there. So I think sometimes we sort of get very focused on what it is the students or the graduates have to do. We need to also take a page out of that book and look at what is it I have to do if I want to offer a successful internship and really truly teach and mentor the next generation of equine practitioners how to be successful.
Well said. Well said. And those resources are tremendous. They're fabulous resources. Really, really very useful. And there's so many of them in so many of the different 5 categories. The culture resources. It's just an amazing body of work. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's fabulous.
And for the internship subcommittee, I mean, a big shout out to all of them, the group that worked really hard on those. Jackie Christakos and Sarah Roos led that group. And they did a tremendous job in pulling that together and not only educating the interns, but also making things available for anybody who wants to offer those kind of experiences and help bring the next generation along.
Is there anything our listeners should know before we close?
One thing I would say is because we now, particularly in the AAEP program, are trying to sort of raise the bar in those internship experiences, students are savvy to the fact that there are certain components or things they should be looking for in an internship. And one of the things that the AAEP group did, the subcommittee, is created a document to help students shop, if you will, for an internship. So if you think about the AAEP Avenues Night and students being able to go around to the various different practices and learn about them, meet with people and talk to them, this document is a very helpful guide for students. As you're thinking about an internship, does the praxis have X, Y, and Z? Do the people at the practice do X, Y, and Z? So it gives them some guidance on what are you actually looking for when you're looking for a good internship, and how will you know when you've found it? So students are no longer, blindly sort of graduating and going out and taking whatever opportunity presents. They're pretty wise and savvy these days. They're going out and looking for that special opportunity and looking for people who are going to really invest in them and really help them develop into a sustainable practicing practitioner.
They really are. And, I think internships in turn are recognizing this and starting to make sure that what they're offering meets some of those criteria, because there's not as many people coming into equine veterinary medicine, and so when they're searching for an internship, some are not filling, and so it's a good thing that we're really raising the bar. It's amazing how far things have come so quickly. I'm pretty proud of the organization.
Me too. And, I would commend you, Amy, on your Decade 1 program and now your Starting Gate program for veterinary students. I would say that if you think about it, that also is following through on the competency-based education. Got a lot of common goals and outcomes that those young people are working towards achieving. And you've got mentors that are working with them on a consistent basis, providing that feedback and helping them figure out, where is it that I want to get to? And am I actually getting there in a meaningful way? And that just builds on that start that they're getting in their education. So congratulations on that program. And I think between that and the things that AAEP is doing, I think the future is looking pretty bright in equine practice.
Yep, we're turning the cruise ship.
We sure are.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Reed. Your experiences in shaping this new way forward are really valuable. And because you were in it from the very beginning and explained how it all came about, it's really not only interesting, but it certainly will help later career veterinarians sort of understand why they need to change how they're mentoring younger colleagues and just how things are changing. And thank you all today for listening to the Business of Practice podcast. And a big thanks to our sponsor, CareCredit. And to all my listeners out there, be brave, embrace change.